So I got a question from a Patreon supporter named James. Hey James, what up? I generally just use people's first names and not their last names in these interactions. James is asking a question that I'm both interested to answer and that I have made videos on in the past and that I probably should make new videos about in the future. James is asking me about my life in France. He says he did watch my video in the past called Why I Am Not French. That video, it's really weird. I've gone back and looked at that once. That video was recorded during a really, really bleak time in my life. I think that was back when I was applying for jobs and hadn't found a job yet, when it was really not clear if I was going to be learning Japanese or Chinese or what I was doing in university and my career in the next couple of years. But for a lot of reasons, probably also, my divorce and what have you, I was really, really down when I recorded that video, and it shows. That's not even the content of what I'm saying, but the tone of that. And the last time I watched that video, I did it while live streaming. I was talking to some people, I was playing it. I was like, wow, I was really, really low when I recorded that video. I thought, God, at some point I have to go back and do Why I Am Not French version 2, cover that same material at twice the pace. And even if you're telling a sad story, you shouldn't really be sad while you're telling the story. It doesn't work on camera so well. But yeah, my experience living in France and attempting to become a French citizen and so on, it's worth talking about, it's worth reflecting on, and of course, positively and negatively, my experience with France has shaped my whole life and will continue to shape the rest of my life. It's still a big deal. I really don't know. I don't think my daughter is going to grow up in France much, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible that France will be her home, and that I will have to be more involved with France in the future. I doubt it, but it's possible. So look, James writes and asks to me, he says, since you're interested in replying to Patreon supporters' questions, and not so many have been put to you recently, because I already answered all your questions, which is great. Ever since I watched your video, Why I'm Not French, I've been curious as to how you survived as a vegan in a country that is so anti-vegan. And right, he alludes to the fact that it's a little bit easier in Paris because there's so many foreigners in Paris as opposed to being in the provinces. Woo! So look, and he then asks, how useful is it to know French as a language anyway? Okay, yeah, France is hell. For vegans, France is hell. There is no point, one of the guys I knew in France, he was a former employee of PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and he said PETA's policy was that they really made a big effort to, promote PETA within Germany, promote veganism in places like the Netherlands, Denmark, but they felt that France was hopeless. This is after years and years of experience of them trying to promote veganism and animal rights and whatever, that France is really especially hopeless. The culture of taking pride in meat and cigarettes and alcohol and of being extremely defensive, really offensive, if anyone dares to question a lifestyle based on constant indulgence in meat and cigarettes and alcohol. This is like the national pride of France, and this is a distinctive national characteristic. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule. Of course, 1 out of a million Frenchmen have questioned and challenged this cultural tradition, but that's what you're going to deal with every day. Now, why is it in the French context that I'm discussing meat in the same category as cigarettes and alcohol? Because I do think in that culture, that's very much how they're received. That meat is imagined as being one of the good things in life, one of the indulgences, one of the enjoyments, and they will, passionately defend a lifestyle that's not just incidentally about the enjoyment of the good things in life, but a lifestyle that's really predicated upon, that has as its main focus, it puts at its center of gravity indulging in these things, even if it kills you. I think there's maybe no other country in the world where if you tell someone that, eating meat causes heart attacks, they will completely accept that and continue. They have no interest. Because for them, meat is in the same category as cigarettes and alcohol, and they are deeply committed to justifying the destruction of their own body, the destruction of their own mind, etc., under the heading of the enjoyment of life. If the enjoyment of life entails suicide by 1,000 tiny cuts, they are down for it. That is bedrock in French culture. So you're never, ever going to make any progress in France with the health-based argument. Now, I mentioned this. I think this is an anecdote I've told before, maybe many times before. I forget. I went to one vegan event in France in particular, what I even call vegan outreach or vegan activism, whatever. And, what you heard from the French was, after they had seen this kind of traumatizing documentary, well, what you say may be true, but everything in moderation. Now, the everything in moderation mantra in France means cigarettes and alcohol and meat 7 days a week, most likely 3 meals a day. Like, their idea of moderation is total self-indulgence all the time. That is the French idea of moderation. Like, the French idea of moderation is getting drunk during your lunch break while you're on the job, but then having a cup of coffee before you go back to work to try to straighten yourself out. Like, it is really, constantly, this is something I really grew up with, questioning within Canada when I was a teenager. What did people mean by balance? What did people mean by moderation? And what I found is that these are watchwords. These are meaningless watchwords that people use, not even to justify their indulgences, just to distract you from them. It's like, there isn't even a justification. It's just a distraction. It's like, yeah, well, you're killing, millions of animals and destroying the world's ecology, and you're destroying your own health. Yeah. Moderation. Like, what the fuck kind of... This does not answer any of those concerns. Yeah, well, water pollution caused as a knock-on effect of the meat industry. Yeah. Moderation. It's just ridiculous. But they believe that. This is not a trivial or shallow problem in French culture. This goes right to the bone. So when you're living in France, that's what you're dealing with. And, you're dealing with a culture that is not incidentally anti-vegan. It's profoundly committed to being anti-vegan. And, I got to see that from so many different angles, including the hatred against myself and my wife, real hatred, really worth saying as such, from medical doctors and nurses, from people in those positions, where their assumptions about me and my wife, because we were vegan, it's not enough to say they were negative assumptions. They hated us for being vegan. And, in one case, I got to see a doctor flip, where this doctor worked with us long enough to realize that we were actually rational and pro-science and into empirical methods and shit. It was fucking despicable. And oh my God. This also relates to, it's a whole different topic, but the French culture of authority, of authoritarianism, and how medical professionals fit into that. That's also a deep, aspect of the culture. Their own, respect for authority and disrespect for you if you're challenging authority. And, all the time, we were meeting doctors and nurses, those types of people. We were meeting doctors who said things that were considered true, like maybe 70 years ago, sometimes 50 years ago. Like, what they were saying was legit medical science, but 50 years out of date minimum, And, the science of nutrition really has changed. But if you're talking to a doctor who is 50 years old, who maybe, who went to university 30 years ago, went to med school 30 years ago, they were using a textbook that was published 30 years before that, and their professor in the med school was 60 years old. It is very easy to get into a kind of lag where you're meeting people who are experts, but their expertise is lagging so far behind. And then again, you combine this with this ultra-authoritarian culture, So I've just got a comment coming in. I'm live streaming while I record this. David asks, are you sure that this is French culture, or is it more of a general Western culture? I know many Americans like that. No, David, I do feel confident in telling you this is really French culture I'm talking about. And I'll give you a real simple example. So in Canada, we produce cheese. Our government takes taxpayers' money to support the dairy industry so we can produce cheese. Are Canadians proud of their cheese? No. Do Canadians have the delusion that cheese is what makes Canada great? No. In France, you will literally meet people who believe that French cheese is what makes France great. It's the national destiny and the national mission, and it's what France is all about, and that therefore the government should support it. You will meet people in France who really believe that some kind of advanced cured beef or, foie gras. Foie gras is legislated as special protected national patrimony. If you guys know, foie gras is a type of duck fat that involves torturing the duck. It's an especially brutal form of meat production. And it's there in legislation, government policy. They believe that. So no, not everywhere is like France. And I mean, the French idea of democracy is very, very different from the American idea of democracy. Even the French idea of a university classroom. So in a French political science classroom, Sciences Po, there is no debate, there is no Socratic method, there is one man who gets to talk, sitting at a table that's on a stage at the front. Nobody else gets to say a word, and that's it. It is a purely top-down lecture. That's how they teach political science. Now, in the United States, a stereotypical political science, especially an advanced level course, is going to be this kind of bullshit American-style workshop where people sit in a circle and the professor pretends that he respects the ideas of the students, and the students all know that they should repeat back to the professor his own ideas. Both political science and business school in the United States use a lot of round table formats, and they talk about Socratic method, and, it's a bit hypocritical. But still, no, it is very, very different, these aspects of French culture I'm talking about. So look, I mean, and the other huge issue here, this is the first thing I thought of when he asked about how hard is it to be vegan in France. Dude, hygiene. Hygiene is fucking terrible. Terrible in France. The vast majority of people in France have no fucking concept that if they touch a dog, they can't then touch food with their bare hands and sell it to you. They'll drop things on the floor or on the ground outdoors and pick them up and eat them. Like when you do find vegan food, like bread, you don't want to fucking buy it because it's been handled in such filthy conditions. No concept of the germ theory of disease, the biological reality that contact spreads germs and viruses. So even when you do find something vegan, if you're paying attention, it's so goddamn filthy. You don't want to eat that either, So, yeah, it's harrowing. It's absolutely fucking terrible. How did I cope? I bought chickpeas. I bought, not canned chickpeas, dry chickpeas in a bag. And every fucking day I made my own hummus for myself and my wife. And when I was there, we eventually ordered protein in the mail, vegan protein powder. Before that vegan protein powder came, that was the most miserable fucking time of my life. I could not find anything that was vegan that contained protein at all in France. I went through a really, really rough time of just eating bread. It was fucking abominable. It was terrible. I'm sorry. And also I got to say this. So I was in the south of France where it's hot. But when we got there in winter, they don't have fruit out of season. They're not importing fruit and vegetables from North Africa and Spain, let alone Mexico, in the winter. So even the availability of fruit and vegetables, a lot of it, there are great grapes for 1 month of the year, grapes or whatever example you want. But then in the winter, when they're not in season, because everyone's eating so much meat, there's no market for it. They don't have that stuff. So even that was shockingly poor when I got there in the winter on that trip. I've lived in France in a few different times. I've been in France in a few different times. But really, when I lived there and applied to become a citizen, it was absolutely fucking terrible. And everywhere we went, we were hounded and disrespected and treated like shit, most memorably by medical doctors and so on. But sure, I mean, like, you know, yeah, sitting in a restaurant and paying to have fucking flatbread with olive oil, you know, have pizza with no cheese on it is a ripoff, and it's fucking awful. And that's about the only thing you can get in the south of France. You can have them make you a pizza without any cheese on it. So, you know, that's basically just flatbread, but you're paying the same amount that someone else is paying to have the same meal with meat and cheese. So you're getting just bread for $20 or whatever. It's just fucking awful. And as is inevitable, you know, the tiny number of people you meet there who are vegan tend to be insane. And, you know, you got to ask about nurture versus nature on that. I know this is like an overused trope, the nurture versus nature hypothesis. But you wonder, was this person crazy before they became vegan? Or is this someone who became vegan, but they're coping with this same fucking horrible stress I got to cope with, and it's driven them crazy, or it's drawn out their, you know, that side of their personality. You know what I mean? You got to ask yourself that question when you know, when you meet those people. And, you know, god damn. I mean, where I was in the south of France, basically everything was infested with cockroaches. Not even complaining. It's a beautiful part of the world, but everything is infested with cockroaches. I was in Perpignan, near the border with Spain, French Catalonia, you know, Catalan border of Spain. If you're going to live there, and, you know, I had a newborn baby. I was a vegan, but I was killing cockroaches because I don't want my daughter plays on the floor. You know, she's a baby who crawls. I would lay down clean mats, and every day I would scrub and clean those mats. You'd have a nice, soft, you know, rubbery set of mats to play on. Newborn baby. I don't want cockroaches crawling on my baby daughter. So I'm killing cockroaches. Everyone, all the vegans I talked to there, all of them were killing cockroaches. We talked about it. I mean, it's an interesting topic of conversation. You know, I'm vegan, you're vegan. You know, we talked about all that stuff. We talked about cat food. There were vegans there who were buying cat food that was made out of meat and, you know, talk about how they feel about it. There were vegans there killing cockroaches. I remember the one guy who opened a vegan restaurant, really a vegan cafe. We tried to sit there, but he was so fucking crazy. He would come out and lecture us, like, not even starting a conversation. Like, I'm sitting there with my wife and infant daughter, just trying to fucking relax and eat a vegan tiramisu, a vegan pudding, and, you know, fucking relax for 5 minutes as the parent of a newborn infant before I go back to my apartment. And this guy comes out of the kitchen and just stands there at the edge of your table with a fucking leaflet and is lecturing you about how there's scientific evidence that, you know, cockroaches are highly intelligent, and that if you're really vegan, you shouldn't kill cockroaches. Yeah, I sympathize with that guy. That guy also, he was doing the thing that, you know, you see some vegans on YouTube do, but he was doing it in real life. He really exercised a lot. He was really muscular. And when people came in and asked him, like, if you could be healthy, he would literally flex his muscles. He would wear a tight t-shirt, roll up his t-shirt. He'd say, look, I'm vegan, and I'm really pumped up. I wonder, he probably was taking steroids. I wonder if his behavior was so crazy because he was on some steroids and some, you know, testosterone booster hormone. That probably explains, because his behavior was really erratic. But he was in good shape. He was a muscular guy. He was a very lean, very muscular guy. Still not good looking. Life is unfair. But yeah, and, you know, whenever meat eaters would come into that restaurant, of course, they'd end up just feeling alienated and convinced that vegans are insane. And the food was terrible. The desserts were okay, but the food was terrible. Anyway. So yeah, I mean, look, the other question here is it actually worthwhile knowing French? It is if you are Canadian and you want to get a job in politics or in the Canadian government. So for me, it's been a big, big question whether or not you should learn French. Otherwise, if you're from anywhere else, the French know it. Their own language has become less and less useful. And they especially resent that in exactly the part of the world I lived in for so many years. In Cambodia and Laos, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam were formerly French colonies. And the French would like to believe that French is still an important language there, but of course it really is not. So yeah, we all got to make choices in life. I talked to this guy recently, it's been mentioned a few times, who was doing humanitarian work around Syria. So he was doing humanitarian work with Syrian refugees, but just over the border, fleeing from outside of Syria. And, was asking him, are you really sure that Arabic is the right language you want to learn in terms of having a positive connection with veganism or a negative connection with veganism, connection to your own political interests and activism and so on. And for anyone looking at learning French, you would have to ask those same questions. And as you will have gathered from this video, committing to learning French would be a very, very difficult decision to make, even for myself, even for someone who has a past and present family connection to France. And still to this day, when I look at university options within Canada that say fluency in French required, I sit down and do the math and ask, can I justify, taking the time now to improve my ability in French as a language? And the numbers just do not pencil. It just does not make sense for me to make that commitment and try to pick up and improve French as a language. But we'll see, guys. If you stick with me here on Patreon or watching my channel on YouTube, you will get to see for yourself to what extent learning Chinese is or is not useful in the rest of my life. And I will never know. I may be able to look back and say how much different my life would have been, or maybe how much better my life would have been if instead I'd put that effort into learning French.